I am 76 years old now, and the winters feel heavier than they used to. Like each gust of wind is carrying memories I've tried too long to hide. Tonight, as the fire flickers low and the last daylight bleeds through the frost-kissed window, I feel the weight of my silence settling on my chest. It's strange how a secret can age alongside you, how it can grow softer at the edges yet deeper at the core, like an old scar the body forgets to ignore. I spent decades guarding something that was never really mine, and now, with my breath turning thin and my hands trembling more often than steady, I feel the old vow loosening within me. My tribe is smaller. The world has changed, and I am the only one left who remembers the truth of what walked beside us. I never thought I'd speak of it, not even here in this dim cabin where the air smells of cedar smoke and cold earth, but the past has a way of calling back, especially in winter. And winter, I've learned, never lies. The fire cracks softly, sending a thin trail of sparks into darkness, and I swear the sound reminds me of footsteps, slow, deliberate, impossibly heavy. Even now, after all these years, my mind wanders back to a night I was never meant to witness. I can still feel the sting of snow on my cheeks, the weight of my grandmother's hand wrapped tightly around mine, guiding me through the moonlit trail as the other elder women walked in quiet procession. I was 9 years old then, small and stubborn and full of questions I wasn't allowed to ask. My grandmother rarely took me anywhere beyond the orchard or the river bend. That night, she didn't explain a thing. She only said, "Walk softly, child. The forest listens." I felt her anxiety like a pulse beneath her skin, though she hid it behind her stern face and steady steps. Even before I saw anything, I sensed something vast waiting between the trees. The deeper we walked, the quieter the forest became. The wind hushed. The owls held their breath. Even the snow seemed to fall silently, as though afraid to disturb what lay ahead. I remember shivering, not from the cold, but from a strange warmth blooming in my chest, a mixture of fear and wonder I didn't yet understand. The elder women carried cedar baskets filled with berries and smoked fish, offerings wrapped in woven grass. Their breath rose into the night, mingling like small clouds drifting from one world into another. They whispered words I wasn't taught, their voices trembling with reverence. I had never seen them afraid of anything, not storms, not wolves, not the biting northern winds. But that night, their fear was unmistakable, and yet it wasn't fear of danger. It was fear of disrespect. When we reached the clearing, my grandmother squeezed my hand once before letting go. Her breath hitched, as if she were bracing herself for something sacred. The snow lay untouched before us, smooth as ivory, and the trees circled the opening like silent witnesses. A strange heaviness thickened the air, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a low, distant rumble beneath the surface, as though something ancient was waking from a long sleep. It vibrated through the soles of my moccasins, climbed into my bones, and settled behind my heartbeat. I stepped closer to my grandmother, but she didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the darkness between the cedars. A shape emerged, first just a shadow taller than any man, then a silhouette outlined by the faint moonlight. I didn't scream, though I felt the urge rise sharp in my throat. Instead, I froze, mesmerized. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, as if he were part of the forest itself. His fur shimmered with frost, his breath puffed in great clouds, and his eyes, those deep amber eyes, glowed with intelligence I didn't have words for then. He was not legend or nightmare. He was real, impossibly real, and he was watching us with the same curiosity that lit my child's heart. One of the elder women knelt and placed the cedar basket on the snow. Another whispered a greeting in our oldest tongue, her voice cracking under the weight of the moment. He stepped forward. The earth groaned softly beneath his weight. I felt warmth radiating from him despite the cold, a living heat that felt ancient and steady. He reached the offerings, examined them with enormous hands, and released a soft, resonant hum that filled the clearing with a strange comfort. The elder women bowed their heads. My grandmother's lips trembled silently, as though she were speaking to someone only she could hear. And then, impossibly, he turned toward me. That moment stretched like a lifetime. His gaze held something deep, something sorrowful yet strangely gentle. I didn't move. Couldn't. He approached until his shadow swallowed me whole, and the world shrank to the sound of his breathing. He lifted one massive hand and brushed it, feather-light, against my forehead. The warmth of his touch spread through me like a spark caught in dry tinder. I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time, not as a child, not as a burden, but as someone he recognized, someone he chose. The elder women gasped, not in fear, but in reverence. My grandmother's eyes filled with tears. Later, I would learn what that gesture meant. Later, I would understand why they looked at me as though the forest itself had claimed me. But in that moment, I only felt a strange certainty settle in my chest, a certainty that would follow me through the decades. His touch was not random. It was a beginning. I didn't know then that he would become the most loyal companion of my life, or that the world outside these mountains would soon hunt him with a hunger that had nothing to do with understanding. I didn't know that the secret press against my skin that night would cost me sleep, safety, and part of myself I never meant to surrender. But I do know this. When he touched me, the forest changed, and so did my fate. And what happened after that night is the reason I'm finally speaking now, before winter claims the last of my breath. I grew into my teenage years with a memory of that night burning quietly in me, like an ember hidden beneath ash. Most of the tribe believed the creature, Makasu, was only a guardian who watched from afar, but I knew better. I could still feel the warmth of his touch on my forehead, a warmth that returned to me in dreams where the forest hummed in a language older than bone. Seasons shifted around us, soft as breathing. Spring rains pattering against cedar bark, summer heat stirring sap's sweet scent, autumn winds cracking branches like old joints. And through each passing season, something inside me pulled toward the deeper woods, as if our brief encounter had tethered us with an invisible thread. My grandmother sensed it. She warned me to walk carefully, never alone. But warnings often fall faint against the stubborn quiet of a chosen heart. It was in the spring of my 15th year when I saw him again, though not in the way I expected. I remember kneeling by the river, gathering feverfew leaves, when the birds around me fell silent all at once. That kind of silence is never natural. It rolls in like a tide pulling everything backward. I straightened, breath caught halfway, and felt the shift in the air, warm, heavy, familiar. Then I turned, slowly, and there he was, half-shrouded in young green foliage. He was larger than I remembered, his muscles corded beneath thick fur, his eyes darker, wiser. But what startled me most wasn't his presence. It was the way he watched me, not with curiosity, but recognition, as though he'd been waiting. I should have run. My knees trembled as instinct urged me to back away, yet the memory of his gentle touch steadied me. I whispered a greeting, my voice fragile, and he lowered his head slightly in response. A soft rumble rolled from his chest, a sound that made the river's surface tremble. It wasn't a threat. It was something like reassurance. When he stepped forward, the ground didn't shake as it had when I was a child. His movements were careful, almost delicate, like a man afraid to startle a bird. That was the moment I understood that he remembered me. And something in that recognition, in that wordless acceptance, loosened the fear wrapped around my ribs. From then on, our meetings followed the rhythm of the seasons, never planned, never spoken aloud. Summer brought him to the berry thickets, where I'd leave small woven bundles of dried fish and sweetgrass. Autumn had him watching me from high branches, his silhouette blending with the dying leaves. Winter drew him closer, as though the cold pressed us into a shared need for warmth and company. He never approached without reason. He never lingered without intention. I learned to read his body language the same way I read storms. Tilt of head for caution, chesum for calm, soft clicking sounds for curiosity. I didn't understand everything, not then, but I understood enough to know he trusted me. Once, in late summer, I wandered deeper into the forest than I should have. The heat was thick, making the air shimmer. I misjudged my footing on the riverbank and slipped down the slope, scraping my legs raw on the rocks. The pain stole my breath. Blood trickled down my shin in winding trails, turning dust to mud. Before fear could swallow me, I heard low, heavy footsteps. My heart stuttered, not from panic, but from relief I didn't dare admit. He emerged from the brush, head tilted, sniffing the air, When he saw the blood, his eyes widened with something that looked painfully human, worry. He approached slowly, humming a low, rhythmic sound that soothed my shaking. Then, with surprising gentleness, he nudged my arm upward, guiding me to stand. He supported my weight with one massive hand until I could walk again. I left that place limping, leaning on a being the world swears does not exist, feeling strangely protected in a way no human had ever made me feel. But trust, once given, deepens into responsibility. By the time I was 25, I understood that he relied on me as much as I on him. It was the winter of '76 when I discovered just how fragile his world was. I found him near the old cedar grove, limping badly, a deep gash running along his thigh. The smell of infection clung to him, sharp, sour, frightening. Snow fell thick around us, muffling every sound except his labored breathing. He sank to the ground, trembling. My hand shook as I pressed moss and heated stones against the wound, whispering the same healing prayers my grandmother had whispered over fevers and broken bones. His immense body shuddered, and his hand, larger than my entire chest, rested gently atop mine, in the dim winter light. With snow gathering on his fur, he looked both invincible and heartbreakingly mortal. A storm forced us to take shelter in a small cave nearby. The night was brutal, wind screaming against the stone walls. Yet inside, all was quiet except for his slow breaths. I sat beside him, exhausted, and began speaking softly about my mother, about the loneliness that had crept into my life after she passed. I don't know why I poured my heart into the darkness, but I did. He responded with a soft rumble, a mournful vibration that seemed to echo my grief. In that cave, with frost thickening on the ceiling and his warmth pressed against my side, our bond shifted. It was no longer a fragile thread of curiosity. It became something deeper, something steady and irreplaceable. But every bond invites its shadow. In the early '80s, odd men began appearing near our land, men with polished boots, metal tools, and eyes that never softened. They claimed to be surveyors, though they avoided questions and carried themselves with an authority that didn't belong in these woods. I began seeing strange tracks near his sanctuary, boot prints, cigarette butts, the metallic smell he hated. He grew wary, restless, glancing over his shoulder even when we were alone. I tried to reassure him, but reassurance meant little against the creeping truth. Someone else knew. Our seasons were no longer just ours. The forest had new eyes watching. And as one autumn bled into another, I felt the first tremor of a fear that would shape the rest of my life, a fear that the world beyond the cedars was closing in on him. And the next time those men returned, nothing in the forest would ever be the same. By the time the '90s settled over the mountains, the forest felt like an old photograph, its colors softer, its edges worn down by the passing years. I was no longer the girl who wandered those trails with berries in her pockets, nor the young woman who tended wounds with trembling hands. The weight of adulthood had crept into my bones. My knees ached in the cold, and my breath fogged the air a little sooner than it used to. Yet every time I stepped beneath those towering cedar branches, the forest welcomed me with the same quiet reverence, as if it remembered each footstep I had ever taken. And he was there too, not as often as before, but always when it mattered. His fur had begun to silver around the temples, and his movements carried a tired heaviness that mirrored my own. We were aging together, two unlikely companions slipping through time like parallel shadows. I often found him sitting near the creek at dawn, as still as a carved figure, watching the water swirl around ancient stones. I would sit beside him, neither of us speaking. There was no need. Silence between us had always been a language of its own. Sometimes he would nudge a broken branch toward me, as if asking me to share in whatever worried him. Other times he would hum a low, haunting tone that made the air vibrate softly in my chest. Those hums grew more frequent in those years, and with them came a tension that spread to the forest like a slow-moving fog. Something was disturbing him, something beyond my sight. It became clear the day I found the first set of footprints, not his, not mine, but heavy-booted steps pressed deep into the mud near his sanctuary. I crouched beside them, heart thudding, fingertips brushing the edges of the tracks. They were fresh, too fresh, and they did not belong to hunters or wanderers. These prints were methodical, wide-set, purposeful. I felt his presence watching from a distance, his breath ruffling the leaves behind me. When I turned, he wasn't standing tall as he used to when danger approached. He was hunched, eyes narrowed, shoulders rigid with something that looked frighteningly like resignation. He knew, he had known before I did. The world outside the forest had not forgotten him. It had simply grown patient. Over the following months, the signs multiplied. Bits of fabric snagged on thorns. The faint smell of gasoline drifting through the underbrush. Metal stakes hammered into soil where no camper would dare stay the night. Each discovery frayed at my nerves, and each time I looked into his sorrow-filled eyes, I felt the sharp sting of helplessness. He began avoiding the lower trails, choosing paths so steep and tangled they shredded my clothes when I followed. He didn't want to be found, but he also didn't want me to be near the danger approaching. He would often step between me and the direction of those unfamiliar scents, guiding me away with a firm but gentle nudge. It broke my heart to see him protective in that way. It meant he understood something I wasn't ready to face. The night everything changed was colder than usual, the kind of cold that pricks at the skin and carries warnings in the wind. I had gone to check the old boundary markers when I heard engines, low, rumbling, unnatural in the quiet of the valley. My breath seized as lights flashed through the trees, sharp and white like broken lightning. Voices, men's voices, followed, clipped and urgent. I froze behind a fallen cedar trunk, the ground trembling beneath my palms. Through the branches, I saw the glint of metal crates, tranquilizer rifles slung over shoulders, and faces hidden beneath hoods. They weren't hunters. They weren't surveyors. They were something else entirely, and they were prepared. I saw him then, across the clearing, half hidden behind a mound of moss and rotted logs. His eyes locked onto mine. In that split second, I saw fear. Real, paralyzing fear. He had survived storms, predators, and the harsh judgment of legends. But this threat shaped in human form, was different. When the first dart flew, it sliced the air with a hiss that made my stomach twist. He roared, staggering backward as the tranquilizer lodged into his shoulder. That sound will follow me to my grave. It wasn't anger. It was betrayal. I reacted before I could think, grabbing the trapper's net from where it had fallen, and hacking at its cords with the small bone-handled knife I always carried. My hands bled as I cut, fibers digging into my skin, but adrenaline surged through me like fire. He tore free, just enough for me to pull the net loose. Then he bolted into the darkness, crashing through brush with desperate strength. I stayed behind just long enough to mislead them, shouting into the woods, scattering footprints, dragging branches to create false trails. It was reckless, foolish, and nearly fatal. But I couldn't let them find him. Not after all he had endured. Not after all we had shared. When the men finally retreated, cursing into their radios, I collapsed beside the river, lungs burning, fingers numb. I didn't cry. I felt too hollow for tears. Only one thought pulsed through my mind. I had put him in danger. My presence, my affection, my stubborn unwillingness to let go, it had drawn them closer. In the days that followed, he disappeared. The forest felt abandoned, empty in a way I had never experienced before. Each trail seemed wrong without his silent companionship. Every rustle in the leaves made me flinch with hope and heartbreak. I searched for him relentlessly, climbing cliffs, wading through icy streams, calling out into fog though I knew he wouldn't answer. When I finally found him weeks later, hidden in a narrow ravine, he looked thinner, exhausted, defeated. He turned away when I approached, not out of anger but out of instinct, to protect me from himself, from his woundedness, from the danger that followed him like a second shadow. But I refused to leave him. I sat beside him for hours, telling stories from childhood, lighting small fires for warmth, offering food he barely touched. Slowly, painfully, he allowed me to place my hand against his fur again. His breath shuddered beneath my palm. That fragile acceptance brought tears to my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I promised him we would find safety again, even though I didn't know how. He leaned into me, just barely, and I knew the fight was far from over, because when I looked toward the horizon, I saw the faint glimmer of lights, Unnatural, approaching, and far too close. The night we fled into the high country felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see which one of us would break first. His steps were slower than I had ever seen, each one drawn from a reservoir of strength that was running dangerously thin. The illness that crept into his lungs rattled with every exhale, and the cold bit deeper into his weakened body than it ever had before. I walked beside him with one hand against his fur, guiding him when he wavered, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. The drone of distant engines haunted the dark behind us, a low mechanical growl that gnawed at my nerves and pushed us onward. I kept telling myself the mountain would protect him, but with every slip of his footing, every cough that shook his enormous frame, doubt clawed at me like a wild animal. When we reached a hidden cave, our last hope, our final refuge, he hesitated at the entrance, staring into its shadowed maw as though recognizing a place meant for endings. The cave was older than memory, carved by storms and centuries, its walls etched with symbols my grandmother once called spirit marks. I lit a small fire near the back, watching the flames flicker across the damp stone, and coax him inside. The warmth reached him slowly, but he sank down with a heavy sigh, shoulders slumping, eyes dimmed by exhaustion. I knelt beside him, pressing herbs to his burning skin, listening to the strained rise and fall of his breath. The smoke from the fire curled around us, carrying the scent of cedar and ash, and for a moment I felt like a child again, tending to a wounded companion I could not bear to lose. I spoke to him softly, telling him stories he had heard before, stories he had once hummed along with, but his responses were faint now. His hand found mine, fingers curling weakly, and the weight of that touch nearly crushed my heart. I could see the years in him, all the winters we had endured, all the quiet dawns we had shared, all the steps we had taken through a world that did not understand him. His chest rose again, slower this time, and his gaze drifted toward the narrow tunnel that led deeper into the mountain. With surprising effort, he nudged my hand, urging me to follow him. I guided him through the tunnel, both of us moving like ghosts through the dim glow of the torch. The tunnel opened into a chamber I had never seen, its walls lined with ancient drawings. Some were unmistakably human. Others bore shapes that mirrored him, broad figures with long arms and gentle eyes. Dozens of handprints overlapped on the stone, human and creature alike. Their colors faded, but their meaning unmistakable. A history hidden from the world. A bond older than any legend. He touched the wall with trembling fingers, then pressed his forehead against it, releasing a sound so soft and sorrowful it felt like the last note of a forgotten song. I understood then that he had brought me here not to save him, but to show me the truth he had carried alone. This chamber was proof that our worlds were never meant to be strangers, and it was his final confession. When his legs finally gave out, I caught him as best I could, lowering his immense weight to the ground. His breaths were shallow now, each one a struggle. I cradled his head in my lap, brushing my fingers through his fur, feeling the warmth slip beneath my touch. He looked at me with an expression I had seen only once before, the night he first placed his hand upon my forehead. Recognition, trust, something like love. I whispered that he wasn't alone, not now, not ever, and leaned my forehead against his. His chest rose one last time, then fell in a slow, shuddering exhale that left the cave impossibly still. The silence that followed was absolute. No breath, no hum, no heartbeat echoing against the stone. I held him for what felt like hours, until the torchlight guttered low and shadows climbed the walls like mourning spirits. When I finally stepped outside, dawn had crept over the ridge, painting the world in muted gold. The cold stung my face, but I barely felt it. I stood there, hollowed by grief, until faint voices reached me from beyond the trees. At first I thought the men had returned, but the tones were softer, familiar. Tribal elders emerged, their faces lined with sorrow, carrying bundles of cedar boughs and woven cloths. They had known he was dying. They had come to honor him. We laid him to rest in the deepest part of the cave, covering him with cedar, singing the old songs my grandmother once whispered under her breath. The harmonies trembled through the chamber, filling the air with a reverence so profound it made my knees weak. When the final chant faded, I placed my grandmother's woven ring in his hand, the same one she wore the night she first introduced me to him. a circle returning to its beginning. Outside, snow began to fall in gentle flakes, drifting to the morning light like a blessing sent by the mountain itself. When I stepped out into the clearing, the elders dispersed silently, leaving me alone with the echo of their farewell. I felt the secret I had carried for decades rise in my chest, pressing against my ribs like a truth demanding release. I knew I could no longer protect him with silence. The world had chased him, hunted him, feared him, yet never understood the depth of his gentleness. So I speak now, while breath still lingers in my lungs, not to expose him but to honor him. If you ever walk deep into the old forest, walk gently. Listen. Remember that some guardians are not made of myths, but of quiet loyalty and ancient sorrow. And as the last light of that day touched the snow-covered pines, I felt something shift inside me, like a sunset settling behind the soul, leaving warmth in its wake. For even in his absence, I knew he was not truly gone. He was part of the mountain now, part of the stories carved into the stone, part of the breath that lingers in winter air. And in that quiet, fading light, I whisper a final promise. I will carry your memory into every dawn that remains to me. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.